Streets in Black and White.
Well, guys, I want to tell you, this is my beginning Harlem experience. I talked a little about it, but I want to tell you about things that went on as young people. Growing up, when we moved to Harlem, we lived in a block that had almost 2,000 people on that one block. And block after block after block, they would have many people. So I'm trying to get you guys to understand, to see how many people that you deal with every day. I told you about the winos and the junkies and the drug addicts and all of that. I talked about the different neighborhoods and how you had to know somebody. I told you about all of that. But let me tell you some kind of funny things that went on as boys growing up in New York. There was always a game being played. There was always over here and over there. And when I first got to Harlem, that next year, I got a bicycle. A couple of my partners got bicycles. The first bicycle I ever had in my life. And we used to ride from Harlem to New Jersey on the bike. And all across the George Washington Bridge. And when you do that, when you ride from Harlem, you have to ride through these different neighborhoods in order to get to the George Washington Bridge. Now, we grew up on Common Avenue between 128th and 129th Street. George Washington Bridge is on 181st Street. And we would ride that whole distance up. Now, we're 10, 11 years old. And we're riding this far by ourselves. And we would ride across the George Washington Bridge into New Jersey. And it was like, wow, because a lot of these cats never been out of Harlem. But when everybody got a bicycle this Christmas, there we were, on the road, riding up. Now, if you're not familiar with New York, there's a lot of hills, so you're going up a hill, you're going down the hill. And it's a lot of areas where you ride on a block and the block would stop. So, this was my early experience with Harlem. Now, I only lived there for the first 2 years. So I lived there from the age of 10 to 12. And then we moved, and that's when we moved into the all-white neighborhood. And in the all-white neighborhood is when I got called out. That's where I was first called a nigger. But I wasn't just called a nigger every day for 2 years. I was also called a coon and a spade. But when you're young and you like to play games, because we all play games in the street, I wanted to play with these white boys, so I had to get the respect, so I had to go through a series of fights with them too. Then I go to a school that had, now understand what I'm saying, it was 2000 in my junior high school, with my 8 black. Until the following, that was 7th grade. The following year is when they started this program called M&M, Minority to Majority. And they bus just 10 blocks away black kids into the all-white neighborhood. And at that particular time, I realized how different that living in one area was, 10 blocks away was another area. Where I was all white, 10 blocks away was all black. Now, the words, the 3 words that I said, now I'm hearing them more often, because now all of these white kids are seeing all these black kids. What, about 40 of them? Think about that. It was 40 of them. They're seeing these 40 black kids now with the other 8 of us, so that's 48. And they're seeing them in their neighborhood, because the school was in their neighborhood. So I'm still living there, but on the weekend I go all the way to Harlem. All the way to Harlem, every single weekend, to hang out with my Harlem brothers, who I have bonded with since I was 10. But now I'm 12. So now I'm bonding with these white boys because I see them every day. Hang out with them every day. They taught me how to swim. They were members, they were Catholic. They were members of the CYO, which is the Catholic Youth Organization, which develops sports teams. So now I joined their sports teams. I wasn't Catholic, but they had already told the priest, we need that brother, because I could outrun them, out-hit them, out-jump them. But it was a beautiful thing, hanging out with them. The second year we lived up there is when I got really physically into sports, because the community pool that was up there, when it closed down for the summer, now understand, the pool in New York only open for 2 months out of the summer, because that's the only time it's hot. So when it closed down, right after Labor Day, the pool closed down, they converted the whole area into a facility that had all kinds of sports venues going. Basketball, boxing. I learned how to do gymnastics. I was on a tumbling team. Oh, I was on everything. So in doing that, you had a bunch of black cats that came from Harlem, because that was the biggest community pool and a community center in that area. But only a handful of blacks lived in that neighborhood. Only a handful of us lived there. The others came from right down the street, but they didn't have that facility in their neighborhood. So now all of a sudden there was a lot of tension between black and white. Now, these guys are coming to the center, but they're going home. I'm at the center, I'm going up the street to where I live, in their neighborhood. Still wasn't no blacks up there. The transfer of blacks only came because. So I have to listen to the verbiage that they use calling us out, meeting new black friends that were just down the street, but they didn't live in my neighborhood. So they don't really know what I was going through. Now all of a sudden, I'm competing with them in their little CYO, Catholic Youth Organization. The difference was, there wasn't but about 3 blacks in that whole organization. So every day, I'm playing ball with them. I learned how to roller hockey, playing hockey on roller skates. That's what they did. The games that they played, I had never heard of them before. So, by all of us living in quote-unquote Manhattan, but this was Washington Heights. I lived in Harlem prior. Everybody had different games. And because there was the computer age, there was no computer games. There were no we played board games. We played the Monopolies and the checkers and the things like that. But they didn't have PlayStations. They didn't have any of this. So here I am learning white boy games. I have to call it like that because that's what they were, white boy games. But as I said, they taught me how to sneak on the subway. I'd never snuck on the subway before, but they had all the ways of getting on the subways. So I'm learning this. But I'm kind of tired of listening to being called out of character every day. The blessing was, only lived there 2 years, but I learned a lot living in an all-white community, seeing how they lived, tasting their diet, because they cooked different than we did. I learned tricks that they learned that I had never seen before. And the learning experience from one neighborhood to another would blow your mind. But we moved back to Harlem. Didn't move where I was, but still hung out with my boys. Now all of a sudden, I'm doing different things. Growing up in New York. Now, I'm back there, but I had taught them the games that I had learned the white boys, and I taught the white boys what the black games were. So we back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And now, I'm getting ready to go to high school. I went to the High School of Fashion Industry. That's where I learned the clothing industry. The High School of Fashion Industry is the only school of its kind in the world. There's no other school like it. Now here's a school that's 10 stories high. There's no school in the world that's 10, a public high school that's 10 stories high. None. We had, the school was large enough to accommodate 3,000 students, but we only had 2,400. Well, let me tell you something. We were a small school. They considered us a small school with 2,400 students because the school that all of my friends went to, George Washington High School, had 5,000 students in high school. And that's when I really got into sports. And I started, I guess you could say, an organized way of playing games when I got into sports. I ran track, I played basketball. And the only reason why I ran track and I played basketball was because in those days, and even today, in the New York City public school system, that's about the only two sports that you have the majority of. Why do I say that? There's no athletic fields. There's no parks near you. So when you don't have a park, you always can run and you can always play basketball. Now I want you guys to imagine this. In those days, some of your best ball players came out of New York. I watched the development of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar because he lived in the projects where my little girlfriend lives. Her sister lived there, so we were always up there. Then he was Lou Alcindor, but we saw him all the time. I watched him learn the game of basketball in a project playground. But I'm in high school, he's in high school. You go through these things of learning by going to different areas and seeing the way that people live. And I was really surprised that if you're black, but you live in this neighborhood, you do things different than if you're black and you live in this neighborhood. If you're white, you live in this neighborhood, and you're white and you live in that neighborhood, they did different things. You'd almost think that during that period of time of growing up in New York, that everybody did the same thing. Got news for you, they didn't. Every neighborhood was segregated. If you weren't the same race of people or the same religious race of people, you couldn't move in that neighborhood. You couldn't. A lot of things I learned when we lived in the all-white neighborhood because my sister's father was superintendent. And he controlled the building. Rented the apartments, fixed the apartments up, painted them. He did the electrical work, he did the plumbing. That's when I got into my skill factor because he used to show me how you did things. But I always remember the owner of the building telling him, now Will, you got an apartment going to be vacant, but you can't rent to coloreds. You were colored at that time. He said, you can't rent to coloreds. And I would wonder why, but I didn't realize the racism that went on in New York. And I'm saying to myself, if you got an apartment and somebody wants it, why you can't have it? Well, it's because that was an all-white neighborhood. These were all white people. We were there only because we were the super kids. So that was an eye-opener to me. After that, and seeing all of this, and going through all of that, growing up in New York, when we moved back to Harlem, I was in heaven again, because now I'm with my people. But now I'm a teenager, so I'm doing things that teenagers do. There was always music being played in Harlem. I don't care where you went, there was music. So as a teenager, you always went on a Friday to the community center. The community centers in New York in those days were in the schools. Friday they always had a dance. Ooh, they always had a dance growing up in New York. Now, long before, there was a Soul Train, or American Bandstand. There was another guy out who did dancing or who catered to teenagers. His name was Alan Freed, white boy. He had the first interracial dance show, but it was local. If you didn't live in the tri-state area, which was New York and New Jersey and parts of Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia area, you couldn't see the show. He had the first one, Alan Freed, and it was called Alan Freed's Big Beat. So he started this show. We used to take a couple of trains, a couple of buses to go to New Jersey to be on the show. Like I said, it was local. And they had a lot of local channels that if you didn't live in a certain area, the rest of the world couldn't see you. So Alan Freed's Big Beat. So we go to these parties. And then there was always a party every single weekend of my life. Somebody had a party. And when you were in school, they made up little cards, and the cards would say who had the party. They had waistline parties. They had height parties. We used to call them rent parties, because everybody had to pay the rent. And that's when I saw my mother. She had hers too. My mother hustled. Cakes and pies she cooked. She made dinners she sold. She did everything. So now I'm watching the hustling part of it there. Now my mother had a job, but to offset the level of poverty we all lived in, my mother always made her some money on the side. And most of the time, she made more money cooking for people than her job paid her. So we grew up seeing this fact, and it wasn't just my mother. A lot of mothers did that. There was every neighborhood you go into, I guarantee you that there was a mother who had a hustle going on like that. Then, when you go up in New York, like I say, the mothers would hang out the window and converse with each other. Across the street, downstairs, over here, but they watched the neighborhood. Or you couldn't get away with something that your mother would know by the time she got home, because somebody gonna tell her, boy, I saw Sandy over here doing this. I saw Jim over there doing that. But by the time you get home, your mother knew what you did. And that's where black neighborhoods were. The funny thing about it, when I lived in the white neighborhood, I didn't see that. I didn't see the mothers. They had put a pillow up on the windowsill, propped out the window, calling Gladys over here, calling Mary over here. Oh, did you see that? That's when I saw the numbers game. Numbers was a form of gambling where they bet on, they call it the digits. You bet on numbers, and if you win, you won money. Now, a lot of people grew up in that era, but they don't know how the game was played. I didn't learn how the game was played until later, but they played numbers. My mother played numbers. Everybody I knew played numbers. There are very few people that did not grow up in New York that didn't play numbers, because it was a street game. Now, I want to inform you people on a lot of things about growing up in New York in those days. As I told you, there was drugs all around me. Heroin. When I was growing up, there was no cocaine, there was no marijuana. It was heroin. That drug was killing people. What people don't know is who were the distributors. The first distributors of heroin were the number riders. They were the drug boys, because they were the ones who were in the street all the time. When it started, eventually, it wasn't the number riders, because you still had number riders, you had bona fide drug dealers. I saw them everywhere. I was enticed all the time to become a drug dealer. I was enticed all the time growing up to be a pimp. I was enticed all the time to be a stick-up artist. I was enticed all of my growing up years to become a thief. I kid you not, people. This was all around me. Everywhere I go, I could have grown up and been the bad guy. Saw them, knew what they did, but it wasn't until later life that I found out how they do that. Now I'm gonna get to that as you journey with me down this path of growing up. So when I saw all of this, I had to figure out an alternative lifestyle, because I really just wasn't me. I wasn't brought up that way. And because I was never desperate for money, because my mother hustled, so we had money. We had no whole lot of money. We had money. So I wasn't tempted to just have to do those things. So I thank my mother and my grandmother for keeping me on this path. Now, on this path of growing up, here's how I started learning things. My mother's sister's husband, my Uncle Steve, he was a landscaper. They lived out on the island in a big, beautiful house. We lived in a tenement. I'll tell you how many people were in that tenement. And he's the one that started prompting me to become a businessman. They didn't use the word entrepreneur back then. You were just a businessman or businesswoman. Entrepreneur, that came later in life. You were a businessman. And he had a very promising landscaping business. So now I'm learning landscaping. Didn't want to be one, it's a lot of work. Back then, because they didn't have gas-powered mowers, push mowers. I learned how to push a mower. I learned how to roll a wheelbarrow. I learned how to do all of that. And then my uncle would always take me as I got older with him, collecting his money, and he'd get a check from the people that he worked for. And he would always show me. He said, now James, he said, this is what a businessman gets after they work. He showed me these checks. Now the check might have been $100. That was a lot of money back then. He showed me these things. So he started telling me about becoming a businessman. So I said to myself, that's one of the reasons why I didn't go, as they say, on the dark side of growing up. Because I was around some positive men in my life who I saw them work, hustle, make money, and live well enough. We didn't live large, but we lived well enough. When I was in the white neighborhood, I saw the men of the family, or most of them wives were housewives in the white neighborhood, whereas in the black neighborhood, there were single mothers. Some of them had jobs, but the majority of them were on welfare. So that the world understands Harlem, those days, where you saw a lot of poor people. We didn't see them sleeping on the street, in tents, cardboard boxes like you see today. You didn't see that. The welfare system did what they did. The ones we saw on the street were the ones that had fallen victims to their own selves. The junkies, the winos. That's who slept on the street in those days. Nowadays, you got whole families sleeping on the street. See? So our view on life was different. They just was on welfare. But how many of y'all guys ever got government cheese or government peanut butter? Just stand in line, because my mother used to send me over there. I'd stand in line, and they'd give you a big hunk of cheese or a big thing of peanut butter. Wasn't Skippy, Jim, or the rest of them. It was just covered in peanut butter. Well, guess what? You had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, oh, you in hog heaven. And then I grew up eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and bologna sandwich, fried bologna. These are the things that everybody grew up. Now, try and get a kid today to eat a fried bologna sandwich. We were fortunate, and we were fortunate because my grandmother who lived with us was a domestic. In other words, she was a maid. but she was a maid for a very wealthy family, the DuPonts. That's the big conglomerate of DuPont everything nowadays. My grandmother was their maid. So every Monday and every Thursday, my grandmother would come home with 2 brown paper sack shopping bags full of the food that was left over, because like I said, nobody had refrigeration in my day. They had an ice box. And with the ice box, the iceman would come around, you get a block of ice, you put it in there, and all of a sudden the food would stay cool. Not cold, just cool. And when the ice melted, you got another piece of ice. Well, the DuPonts didn't have refrigeration, they had, but they had money. And every Tuesday morning and Friday morning, their supply came like clockwork. So all the food Monday night, they would give to my grandmother. And Thursday night, they would give to my grandmother. So we had food. And because we had a ice box like they did, my mother would cook up the food, because it's going to spoil if she don't cook it up. And she would feed the neighborhood. My mother fed the neighborhood because the DuPonts had ordered so much food, but they didn't care. And my grandmother would cook it. Whatever was left over, they gave it to my grandmother. Her name was Rebecca Marini. And Mr. DuPont, because I've been to their house at times with my grandmother. And he said, now Miss Rebecca, take this food home. Make sure your family eats well. Oh, we ate well. Oh, yes, we did. Because from them, we ate the things that nobody else in our neighborhood had. Steak, lamb chops, prime ribs, grade A eggs, not that little X eggs that they sold in our neighborhood. We had fresh milk, cheese, and butter. And I'm talking about real fresh milk. You know, how many of you guys ever grew up and when your parents boiled milk and they brought it home, you had to shake it up because the cream had rose to the top. So they had to shake it up to homogenize to the kids. This was long before homogenation had come into existence. And that cream would be on the top of the milk. You had to shake it up. Make sure you mixed it up. So we ate good. Now here's something that I didn't know until later in life. My grandmother would wash the clothes. They had some children, and they were my age, but not my brother's age, even though we were 2 years apart. My brother was a larger version of a black child. So they would give also my grandmother the clothes the kids didn't want anymore. Now they only wore them 2 or 3 times, and all of a sudden they wasn't good enough. So my grandmother washed them twice. They wasn't gonna wear it no more. You know, we washed clothes for 100 dimes. They would give my grandmother these clothes, little T-shirts, little shorts, little windbreakers, things like that. And when she brought them home, I would get a little pair of scissors and a straight pen, and it had a little insignia on them. And I would try and pick and get rid of that insignia because nobody in my neighborhood wore something with something on it. It wasn't until later in life that I realized how lucky I was to get those clothes, because these clothes had a little alligator on it. Izard LeCron. I didn't know who that was. Ain't nobody in my neighborhood knew who that was. So I could walk around with an alligator on my shirt. Now, that's all you want, is something with an insignia on there. But I didn't know. So I'm trying to get that off of my shirt before I could wear it. Because the first time I wore it, the boys in the neighborhood started laughing at me. Oh, McAllen, look at you. Got a little sissy something on your shirt there. I had no idea how popular and how big time that brand was. They were, I don't know if they're the first ones that branded their clothes, but they were one of the first. Now, understand, people, This is the late 40s that I'm talking about, early 50s. So branding, as we know it today, everybody wants a brand name. So back then, I didn't know. So we're growing up, we had everything that we wanted. My mother didn't make a whole lot of money, but she had that. So then, we're going to dances, we're going to parties.
I think it's time now to sort of slow the tempo down and introduce you to some real solid groove music that's sound as a rock. In fact, I'd like to present to you a man who wisened the world up about what the blues is all about. They call him Big Joe Turner, the daddy of the blues, and I like to set a tempo sort of like this for him to bring him on so I can give him to you. Hey, Joe! Hey, Big Joe Turner! Come on in!
Gets crazy, no? Sound off, boy. Let 'em rock a while. Crazy. Get out of that kitchen, baby. Wash your face and hands. Get out of that kitchen, baby. Wash your face and hands. Wear your big smile, stop, because I'm such a hungry mess. Where you wear your hair, baby, look so mellow and fine. Where you at, you look so mellow and fine. I can't believe my eyes, all that jive in mine. I believe to my soul you a devil with nine holes. I believe to my soul you a devil with nine holes. Well, all I work, baby, the faster my money goes. I did shake, rattle and roll. Shake, rattle and roll. Shake, rattle and roll. Shake, rattle and roll. You won't do right, I don't know. Shake, rattle and roll. Crazy. Hey, boy. Crazy stuff. Well, all right. Yeah, get it, boy. Like a one-eyed cat peeping in a people's door. I'm like a one-eyed cat peeping in a people's door. I can look at you, baby, there you ain't no child no more. Well, over the hill, way down underneath. Well, over the hill, way down underneath. You make me roll my eyes, baby, make me grit my teeth.